So if you need a VPN, go Nord. Use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount off your Nord VPN plan plus 4 additional months for free. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. Protect your computer like a cricketer protects its nether region with NordVPN today.
Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 35 of the Footmarks podcast. I'm your host, Behram Qazi, who you can find at DefMango on Twitter. And with me, as always, is Jarrod Kimber, who you can find at Jarrod Kimber, literally everywhere across all social media platforms. And the topic for today is actually inspired by a piece that our colleague Cheyenne wrote. So shout out to Cheyenne, brilliant piece. And we're going to do justice to it by a BTS and talk at length about Steve Smith's experiment of opening the batting, starting the West Indies series. The title for this is The Dawn of Smith's Opener Era. And I was discussing this with Jarrod that I asked him, is this still Planet of the Apes? But he definitely passed it. So, Jarrod, David Warner, of course, has called it a day in Test cricket. And, while he was playing his last series, he opted or elected Marcus Harris to be his replacement. Mm-hmm. Kim Hughes really wanted Cameron Bancroft to be his replacement. In fact, I think he's puking right now because Bancroft didn't get selected, in his own words. And then Marnus wanted Steve Smith to open, which was also the desire of Smith himself. And while Matt Renshaw has been drafted in the team, Smudger is set to open the batting for Australia for the first time ever. And he claims that the 2019 Ashes is proof that he can do the job. And also he said that he simply cannot wait to, bat and can't wait for his turn to bat. So what are your immediate thoughts about all of this?
So I can't remember when I was told about it, but I was told that he had asked a while back. Probably it wasn't in the Ashes, because it sounds like he asked in the Ashes and they all thought he was taking the piss. So it might have been the start of the summer when I was first. I think I was asked whether they thought it would work. And it was someone from within the camp. They weren't really asking my opinion, but more like, I think they were trying to talk about it out loud with someone that wasn't in the team or wasn't around the team. And my first thoughts were, why does he need to do this? And what is wrong with his batting that will be helped by opening would be that. Those are my initial thoughts on it. There's nothing to say that within his game he doesn't have the skills to be able to do it, but generally openers average less than other batting positions. So, he's already been struggling with his average for him, not for a normal human, but for him. Does he want to put himself in a situation where he goes down? Then I remember that they're playing West Indies in this series at home, and that it probably won't matter what he does. But yeah, I was a bit surprised because I was a bit confused and shocked because generally players of Steve Smith's caliber, what they do is late in their career, they move down a spot or two. Sometimes they move down a couple, right? And they end up at, if they're number 3s, they end up batting at number 5, and number 4s end up at 5 and 6 and all that sort of stuff. And, you could see with Alan Border's career, that's sort of what happened with him as a player. I think he was a number 3, then he became a number 4, then he became a number 5 and 6 towards the end of his career. It's a very normal thing for an aging great player because essentially you then get the extra couple of years out of them, right? Without them having to worry about, being in early and everything else. And Steve Smith's like, do you know how I'm going to deal with this? I'm going to go to the top of the order and do the opposite of what everyone else has ever done. And if it was any other player, if this was Kohli, I'd be like, what the hell are you doing? But with Steve Smith, I think he has the game to be able to open. But also, I'm through doubting him because I never understood how he batted in the first place, and it seemed to work really, really well. So at a certain point, I'm like, there must be a reason that he thinks this is going to work. And he's talked a little bit about Cameron Green and everything. I'm not saying it's not about Cameron Green, but I don't think that's the reason he's moved to the top of the order. I do think there is something to do with the way he's been batting that he thinks this will suit him more. And that's the reason he's going to the top.
And we plan to go into all of those nitty-gritties in this podcast. But just before, I want to touch a bit more on that unique aspect of this call by Smith, right? You mentioned how we rarely see premier batters in world cricket, particularly those of Steve Smith's stature, give up their spot purposely, and that too in the twilight of their career. Steve Smith is 35 in the summer of 2024. It's not too far away. It's probably like 5 months or something. And he's
with
going
not
to
Australian summer. Northern Hemisphere summer.
Northern Hemisphere summer. So, yeah, Australian winter. But, just the fact that he's going out there to open and this is his choice, to call this move bold is an understatement.
Yeah, it's nutso would be the word I would use. As I say, it doesn't really, it's just not what people do. I think there have been batters who have been struggling to keep their spot. Right? Maybe as they're getting older and they think to themselves, well, if I open here, there's no good openers around. I'll be able to do that for Steve Smith isn't struggling for his spot, right? Mm-hmm. He's going to bat for another 3 years for Australia, unless the planet doesn't last that long. And so, I think that's where I found it most surprising that he had made this decision with that in mind. It wasn't career saving. It's not really career prolonging in his case because, again, if he averaged 40 for the next 3 years, I remember writing about Ricky Ponting in, I want to say 2009 or 2010 going, he's done. This is over. Like, he's really, really struggling. He shouldn't continue to play. And just Australian fans came out of everywhere to tell me I was wrong. Ricky Ponting then wrote in his book that was right. Right. And a couple of years later, that's nothing to do with me being right in that situation or being wrong. The point is, it's very hard to drop Ricky Ponting when he was that good because there were so many, it would cause such a big issue. Right. Yeah. And we see this all the time. Sachin's last couple of years probably had replacements who could have scored the same amount of runs. But can you drop Sachin? Well, Smith is even higher than Ponting on the all-time Australian, batting talent list, right? It's just not an easy thing to be able to do. So he has chosen this either out of the goodness of his heart to get Cameron Green in the side, or more probably because there is something within his batting that can be triggered. But it's just baffling to see a player do this late career at his age and his position in the game, and also from number 4. If it was a number 3 going, I'll go one spot up, we'd be like, okay. If you're a number 3, you're basically an opener anyway, half the time, so that's fine. But he's been batting at number 4, and he's suddenly like, do you know what I would like to do? I would like to face the first ball. What? It's just a very, very interesting maneuver by, I suppose, a very interesting player.
Yeah, definitely very bizarre and requires a certain amount of cojones, but Steve Smith has never been short of those, I suppose. Let's rewind time to the summer or Northern Hemisphere summer of 2015. We're in Kingston, Jamaica, and Jerome Taylor has removed David Warner first up on a Sabina Park green top. And for the first time in his Test career, Steve Smith is batting in the first over of a game or of an innings. And no other batter crosses 50 in this innings. Smudger goes on to score 199 runs, completely unfazed by all of the chaos around him. And I'm curious to know why he didn't cite that innings as evidence as opposed to the 2019 Ashes, because that's a solid claim right there.
Probably because people have forgotten about West Indies, wickets and how dangerous they can be and everything else at times. But so me and Cheyenne are doing the book on the 50 greatest batters. So one of the things that we're looking at specifically for opening batters, and I suppose you could probably venture out to top 3s, is how well they play the lateral moving ball. Well, that's hard to do without CricViz before 2006, right? So the metric that I've come up with is looking at opening batters in England, New Zealand, and South Africa combined. When you look at that, you don't need to point out one particular test match like we did or one particular series like he did. It's just there in the numbers. This is a man who is an above average batter in South Africa. In the brief amount of time he's been in New Zealand, he's been absolutely fine and smashes England everywhere in England. I don't think I've seen an Australian player ever in my lifetime who comes close to playing the lateral moving ball as well as Steve Smith does. Ponting certainly didn't. Steve Waugh was really, really good at it. I don't think he was at Steve Smith's levels. Again, he just has that ability to play the moving ball so well. So he could have pointed, Behram, at any number of things just because he is that much better than everyone else, I think, when it comes down to it.
Just on that, you mentioned, how well he's fared in South Africa, New Zealand, and England. He's a plus batter in all 3 of those venues where, the lateral movement is quite significant. And I just want to highlight how good, because he averages significantly better than what top six batters average in those venues. His average is 20 runs or 20 more runs per wicket than his teammates on those venues. And that is just outrageous. And it suggests that he can definitely cope with the moving ball, or more than cope.
Yeah, I would say that the other thing that we know about him is I think he's the best player of pace bowling in our generation. Maybe out and out pace, I would have AB de Villiers slightly ahead of him. But overall pace and lateral movement combined, I think he's certainly a better player than AB de Villiers. Who, like, I mean, I don't even think it's that particularly that close, right? Of just how much better he is than everyone else. And again, that's what he's going to have to do. He's going to have to, face pace bowling. And maybe that is part of not that spin bowling is part of the issue why he's moved away, but just like he might even be thinking, look, I'm better against pace here. This will give me about 25 overs against pace every innings. And then I can worry about the other stuff when I'm already on 50, right?
Yeah.
Rather than worrying about it when I'm on 10 or 15. I don't know. I don't know what that is, but he can play the lateral moving ball and he can play pretty much all kinds of seam. He's set up already to be an opening batter, and he's batted at first drop enough. Not like the majority of his career, but enough that he can do it. And anyone who can bat at first drop in Test cricket can open the batting, right? They don't always want. There's the psychological thing of. Have you ever opened the batting in a proper game of cricket?
Oh no, I would never dare to. I was like number 8 or number 9.
I just wondered if there was an odd game where something happened. So it's a really weird situation to walk out and bat and open. So I opened probably from the age of 10 to the age of 16, 17. And then restarted opening when I was 19 or 20. And I was terrified when I went back to it. It is just a really weird thing where any other batting position I feel very comfortable about. And there are players who, like I'm talking about professional players who, I played in a game with former Test players, in like a veterans game, and they all were arguing not to open the batting, right? And none of them liked doing it. And one of them went out to, a decent club level opening bowler, and he was just demoralized. Like, it doesn't suit everyone's personality. I think with Smith, loves seam bowling, handles the moving ball really, really well. We know he loves batting in the first innings. We know he loves batting when the narrative hasn't yet been set and he just has to go out there and bat. Like, there are so many different things that ring the bell. It's interesting to me that he hasn't opened more in cricket for overall, only because I think the more obvious place would have been, him opening the batting in ODI cricket. And also perhaps opening the batting in T20 cricket at times as well, which I know he has started to do or done a little bit more over the last couple of years. But he's not one of those guys who you would say isn't a natural at this. It's like it makes sense for him to be able to bat in that position.
You've obviously mentioned a lot of elements to his game which make this seem like a plausible sort of, option or decision. But just to talk about pace bowling, of course, we mentioned lateral movement before and how he's done well. But Steve Smith, just to tell our viewers and listeners, of course, he's going to get to face a lot of pace bowling as an opener, but this is a guy who has the highest average versus pace since 2010, and he is averaging 6 more runs per wicket than the next best in AB de Villiers. And Jarrod, the fact that Steve Smith has played in the pace playing pandemic, whereas de Villiers probably just played a year of it or something, that just makes the stat all the more crazy. And it further strengthens the notion that he will break a leg as an opener, metaphorically. Not literally, but it's crazy how he's gotten or he's played in an era where it's really, really tough for top order batters to survive and average as well as he's had. It's just ridiculous.
He also played in the pace playing pandemic when he wasn't at his best. Yeah. Right? And it is possible that his lower average is actually partly down to that and all this other talk about him not being the same player he was. And I know he's had some technical issues, but I do think a big part of it is that he hasn't handled the wobble ball particularly well. And there's no reason why he should handle it any better than anyone else. He stands on the crease, right? And LBW has been a bigger issue with the wobble ball than it was beforehand. So, all these things play into that. But he's still averaged, is it since Sandpaper? He's averaged 47, or is that right?
So it's worth mentioning over here that the stat that I have over here is pre-COVID and post-COVID. So
Yep.
pre-COVID, his average was 62.84. Funny how we're talking about the actual pandemic now. So 62.84 in Test cricket, before the actual pandemic, and after he's had 56 innings in which he's averaged 46.67.
Yeah.
Now, that said, even though there's a drop off over there, he's still averaging 11 more runs than the global average of top 6 batters in that period of time, which is still quite effective.
Oh, look, that's elite at this point. It's just that he was averaging 60 beforehand, right? So
Yeah.
it's a massive drop for him. If he played another 5 years and he averages 47 for the next 5 years, he still probably ends up in the top 10 batters of all time list, right? Because I think I'm going off the top of my head from the book that we're writing. I think he's got 9 years already where he's averaged over 40 with the bat, and about 6 or 7 where he's averaged over 50 with the bat. So if he doesn't go on and have 55 and 65 average years and ends up averaging 47, he still probably comfortably gets in that top 10, just because by that point he'll have the amount of runs and he'll still be averaging mid 50s. Right, like maybe it goes down to low 50s, and then he's got like a Sachin or Ponting average rather than one of those ridiculous
Sangakkara average.
Sangakkara,
57. Yeah.
So you look at that, and you do, and you need to start putting things into perspective. But also, if you are Steve Smith, he probably is thinking that 47 is low for him, right? And that he has more in. And the one thing I would say that suggests that he's right, and this is where I think me and Cheyenne are interested in this, and it might be another piece in the future about him, but he's still staying in a long amount of time, but he's not scoring the runs that he used to. And that seems to me to be more of a decline issue than anything else. But it might just be that batting over the last couple of years was tougher. And, he had a year off as well. Got hit in the head really badly. Like a few major things happened to Neil Wagner. All these different things happened in a short period of time to him. And he's not quite the player that he used to be. All those things are very possible.
I mean, excuse me.
I agree.
Even though those numbers have dropped off from those otherworldly numbers, of course, he's still averaging in these 56 innings, he's averaging close to 47. That's still really, really good. But, you mentioned about how he's still batting time. Now, Steve Smith averages just over 96 balls per innings. I think that's for this period. Might be wrong over there, might be overall. But
no, I think that's right.
Point is that batting time is an important attribute for an opener in particular in Test cricket, because you have to see off the new ball. And that at times, or more often than not, is imperative towards your team's success. So that definitely makes him suitable for the role.
Yeah, no, again, I mean, they're not going to find another David Warner style opener. So they're going to have to go with a more conventional opener like, Bancroft or Harris or Renshaw. All those guys are the same. Like, unless they weren't, even if they went with Green, he's probably still a defensive minded player, right? The other thing I would say is that the field is going to be up more. The ball is going to be harder, and he's a timer of the ball. There is a chance that if he faces 96 balls per game, he will score more than he will in the middle order, where it's just you have to hit the ball a little bit harder and you have to try it. The field is a little bit more spread and everything else. But yeah, 100 balls a game is kind of the magic mark of really good openers. That's where it. Unless you're an attacking opener like Warner, that's the point at which you make a big difference to your team. You are talking about a serious amount of overs that you have taken away. So the middle order, are completely shielded from the top and everything else. So again, you're right, completely set up for that.
Yeah. Another thing you mentioned earlier, I just want to revisit over here. Of course, we know that Steve Smith has never opened an innings in either tests or first-class cricket. And surprisingly, his best average, or the best he's fared in any batting position in Test cricket, that comes at number 3, not number 4. He averages an astronomical, 67.07. At number 3, he batted over here between 2015 and 2017. So he's also done really, really well whenever he's come out to bat in the first 10 overs. Thank you to Anirudh from cricket.com. He's the reason why we know this. And all of this suggests that this is not going to be an alien challenge for Steve Smith. He's ready for this.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you there. I think he's got all the skills, as we've already said, and he's proved it enough in when he's had to go in early and everything else. So the number 3 numbers, the only thing I would say about those is they probably come in the middle of his batting peak. And if he batted at number 8 in that period, he might have averaged 90, right? Like, let's just be honest. That's how he was batting at that stage. Also, I listened to a really interesting interview with Steve Smith the other day with Mark Waugh, and he was talking about how he was listed to bat at number 9 in his first Test match at Lords, the one where Marcus North takes 6 for and Afridi retires. It's really funny. He's completely forgotten that he was actually listed at 8, but Mitch Johnson went up as a night watchman ahead of him at one point. It just shows you the kind of mindset he has, though. Like, these things really matter to him, and that's all. He felt it was clear the way he was telling Mark Waugh all these years later that he still felt slighted by this thing. Yeah, it was like batting at number 8 was a slight, and batting at number 9, how dare they? And those things do matter to him. He's not an easygoing person when it comes to batting. I think he's an easygoing person in his general life, but I think in batting he's very, very particular, right? Like the way he looks at things. So again, I think the number 3 average probably flatters him because it was in his peak. But it's another plus, right? It's another, okay, he can do that. Okay, he can bat in the first 10 overs of Test matches. The first 20 overs of Test matches, he has no issue at all. I think we already know that because there's no way that he wouldn't have been in from time to time in those positions.
Yeah, you mentioned Mark Waugh's comments. Of course, Ricky Ponting was playing in that Test match in which Steve Smith debuted. And if I remember this correctly, Punter wrote him off a bit, right? He mentioned that he might not be cut for this level.
So I can't remember who asked the question, but there was like 5 Australian journalists and like maybe a Pakistani journalist at this press. It was up in Leeds. It was a neutral test. And it might have been myself, or it might have been Bryden Coverdale. I can't remember who asked, but someone said, Steve Smith's made runs. He's, do you ever see him as being a genuine top 6 player? And Ponting said no, right? And if that sounds now ridiculous, you need to realize that everyone in Australian cricket and everyone who'd seen Steve Smith play said the same thing. But he had just smashed Danish Canaria for a brilliant 77 on a tricky wicket at Leeds, and yet still no one believed in him. So, he holds a little bit of that, I think, to this day. It's no different than anyone watch The Last Dance. Like, so I don't know if I've ever told this story to you before, but it's a fascinating story. If you watch The Last Dance, Michael Jordan goes on and on about how he didn't make his high school basketball team, right? And as a basketball fan, I've heard this story like 100 times. So eventually, some American journalist goes out and checks it. And the story actually is that Michael Jordan was a fantastic player at a very young age, but the senior basketball coach was worried that if he played him, he was only going to get about 10 or 15 minutes because he had a bunch of senior players who were going to play ahead of him. So he said, go and play on the junior team and you'll be able to play 35 minutes a night, get heaps of reps, and then next year you can come and start for us. And it's a bit the same with Steve Smith. He was in that side because they needed a bowler. That's why he batted at number 8. It wasn't because they didn't think he could bat, right?
He looked like Shane Warne, so they were like, yeah, sure, let's play him as a leg spinner.
7-wicket haul in one crappy Shield game, despite the fact he hadn't actually taken that many other wickets. And then when he comes back straight into the team, he comes straight back in the top 6 the next time he plays, right? But players do think about those sorts of things, and they do use them as motivation. And I think the whole number thing to him is really important. I know that there was a point in the T20 setup where Australia was desperate to get him to move to number 4, and they couldn't do it just by asking, and they had to subtly manipulate him to get him down the order. And then I think after that he said, I want to open in T20 cricket. It's just like, okay, right? And so these things matter a lot to certain players. There are other players who literally, you can say, I found this whole genre of England players where they almost don't have a number, right? He opens for 10 matches, then he bats at 3, now he's at number 5. Oh, he's back at number 4 again. And it's just like, there's clearly this genre, I would say it was from the 1950s, maybe, probably 1950 through to 1975, 78-ish, where these guys, they were just like, Colin Cowdrey, Ken Barrington, Peter May, you're just going to go into a different spot. Cricket has really changed from that, and batters have got numbers in their head and the psychological element of it. And Steve Smith is one of those kinds of dudes. A lot of people complain that I'm not a former cricketer and so that I don't really know the game. Well, you know what they can't claim? Then I don't know desks. I've been using desks for years. I'm a collector of desks, old and new, and I am sitting on a new one right now. I am the Don Bradman of sitting at desks. So when I tell you that the E7 Pro next generation height adjustable desk from FlexiSpot is legit, this is like Michael Jordan talking to you about sneakers. This desk holds 160 kilograms. It is as stable as anything I've ever seen, and it has under-desk cable management. But really, the main skill here is that this desk rises and falls at the push of a button, and it moves super quick. And it has so many settings that remember your favorite heights. It really does it all. And I could not recommend the E7 Pro from FlexiSpot anymore, even though I am currently sitting on one of FlexiSpot's BS12 Pro multifunctional, adjustable, upgraded fabric, ergonomic chairs. My butt and computer have never been happier than when using one of FlexiSpot's products. So get over to their page right now for big savings.
Yeah, I mean, if he batted at 8 and 9 in his debut series and then came up to the top 6. And also, just to let viewers know, in that test match at Headingley versus Pakistan, in which, he scored 77, in the first innings, Australia pretty much lasted for 77 runs.
Yeah.
And that was the first time Pakistan defeated them in like 15 years in test cricket. So
and Smith,
just let that sink in.
And Smith almost stole that match, right? Like, if I remember,
Yeah.
he hit them back into that match. They were massively behind. I remember it because I think it was the first game I ever covered at Leeds, and the rugby stadium was missing, and they must have been constructing the rugby stadium at that time. This is my memory of it.
You're right.
Yeah, and Smith kept hitting the ball into the construction site. That's how I remember all those different things. It was an incredible inning, and I came away thinking, "Am I wrong?" And eventually, I thought, actually, I think he'd be a fantastic player of spin, but I don't think he'll handle pace bowling. And then by 2013, no quick in the world could get him out.
Yeah, I remember the construction bit for completely different reasons, because Salman Butt, after winning that test match as captain, said that Pakistan's team is like that construction going on over there. It's a work in progress, and once it's done, you'll see a lot of results. And then the spot fixing scandal happened. Anyway, let's move on.
Leeds Rhinos, just their future just got dark, didn't it?
Yeah, lots to unpack over there. I was 16 and my heart was broken. Anyway, we'll come back to that in another podcast. Cricket nerds and everyone who watched our podcast and Footmarks podcast on Steve Smith's sleeping habits during Test cricket, Smudge and Snooze. If you haven't watched it, definitely that's a recommended watch after this one. They'll know that Steve Smith is at his best when he's batting in the first innings of a Test match. If it's the first innings, it's the best. If it's the second innings, meaning it could still be his first innings in the match, it's still really, really
I
good.
hate that, by the way. Because what you just said then, every time I write it down, I think I'm going to confuse people. Because you say first innings, and then later on you think, do they think I meant first innings? Or do they think I meant first/second innings? And it annoys me so much.
Maybe you should say first of 4 innings. But anyway, when he bats in the first of 4 innings, he's the best. Second of 4 innings, he's, also elite. And basically, our conclusion, or Jarrod's conclusion, was that that's because he doesn't have to set the narrative of the test match. Now, coming in as opener, he doesn't have to set the narrative at all. He comes in and he's the one who kind of gets those first runs on board. And, even the bounce is sometimes, more or less even at that point as well, because uneven bounce troubles him. But can we continue to expect those daddy hundreds by the man now that he'll be facing the new ball when it's hard more often?
I don't know if it's going to change him from averaging 47 to springing back up to 55 or 60, just because I think so many things have changed. But what I do think is psychologically, so what I meant by the whole narrative thing with Steve Smith is, if you follow his career, he kind of likes it when his job is just to go out there and bat, when the game situation hasn't happened yet, and it's just your job is to make runs. Yeah. And I think that is when he is absolutely at his best, especially in test match cricket. As an opener, that is the main thing you do. So even if you're batting first drop, a certain narrative has been set. If they've taken the wicket early, that's the situation. If your team's been scoring slow for an hour and then you go in, if you're completely on top, all those sorts of things, there's little narratives that are set. Opening the batting on day one is absolutely made for Steve Smith, to a point at which I wonder if during his peak years, if he'd done that, he might have actually averaged more than 80 odd, right? Like 110 in those innings. So that is something I find really, really interesting. And again, even in the second innings, there's still an element of that, I think, about his batting, right? Like, you know, there's a little bit more narrative when you go out in the second innings. But again, when you're an opener, nothing's happened yet. So you go out there, you set the tempo, you bat the way that you want. And I do think that will suit him psychologically a lot. In fact, I'd never thought about him as a potential opener just because he was so good and he didn't need to bat there. But when you do start to break down the parts of his game, you go, maybe he was always an opener and should have opened there before.
I mean, Michael Clarke, who was his captain in that Sabina Park Test match all those years ago, he actually believed that Smith could be an elite opener in Test cricket. So, I mean, there were some people who were on that boat.
What's an elite opener in Test cricket, though? Do you think now?
I mean, up until Sehwag was around, he was definitely in that category.
He retired 2013. My point is, in the last 5 years, it's been Warner on the struggle, Elgar at home, Karunaratne at home. Brathwaite,
Abdullah Shafiq outside of Australia has done well, and then Rohit.
That's very recent. Yeah, Abdullah, very, very recent. Latham, again, most of his runs are at home or against poor teams. I'm not slacking off all these guys or anything, but what I'm saying is, it was funny when Michael Clarke was like, he could be the best opener in the world. I'm like, yeah, but he could do that if he was averaging like 44 for 5 years. Yeah. Like, because Rohit's currently going to retire and Usman's probably going to retire. So unless someone else comes, unless Jaiswal comes up or something, it's like there actually aren't that many great openers in the world for you to be good at. It's just an interesting aside.
Yeah, I mean, Khwaja is definitely the correct answer to that question, because I think Shayan and I were discussing this, that he might just be the best batter in all positions in the last couple of years, because he's just been that good, right? Ever since those twin hundreds at Sydney in a Test match, he was never supposed to play. So thank COVID for that, Usman.
Not bad for a guy who, in his peak years, I think averaged 30 in first class cricket for a couple of years. It's incredible comeback.
Yeah, now he's almost averaging 50 in Test cricket, which is crazy. Funnily enough, let's talk about batting partners now, because Steve Smith has a terrific record batting with Usman Khawaja, and he also loves batting with his best mate, Manas. So that should help, right?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if it was younger players coming through, or he had to bat with Renshaw or even Bancroft or Harris, it would be a little bit more confusing. But again, I think he's made the most runs in Test cricket with Khawaja and the second most runs with Manas. Is that right? Was that?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
The Khawaja bit is definitely correct.
Yeah, I think it's those two are at the top of the list. There might, unless there's one other partnership I'm forgetting, but I think it's those two guys. So he's just batting with them in a slightly different position. So again, it's incredible how many of these things kind of fell into place, where I'm trying to think of someone else of, you know, if Joe Root suddenly started opening and he finds himself with Ben Duckett and some random number three, like Joe Root's going to have to build those relationships up a little bit. And for those who don't know, like at that top level, one of the things that's really great is if you know the batter you are playing with, you know, there's almost, it focuses your mind a little bit more, because, you know, if Warner's facing an off spinner, Smith's going to be like, just get yourself off strike, mate, and I'll take the rest of this over, and you know, we'll worry about the rest later. It's little things like that that are automatic, right? And he just knows what Khawaja is going to want to face, what Khawaja is not going to want to face, right? And exactly the same with Manas. So again, it's a very good position to be in, I think, from that.
Yeah, and he's batted a lot with both of these guys, and I mean, at least with Khawaja, they kind of, you know, started their careers at the same time as well, and have had different trajectories. And Manas is like Steve Smith light. He's the guy who wants to be Steve Smith. So that's an interesting friendship right over there. So it's interesting how, you know, speaking of Khawaja, of course, he's a prime example of this, but this isn't the first time a middle order batter has been promoted to opener in recent times. Khawaja being the prime example. Then in Australian cricket history, you can go back to Langer, Katich, Watto. And then elsewhere, there's Dilshan, Rohit Sharma, who's really done extremely well. And Sehwag also started off in the middle order. Baz McCullum, Azhar Ali, Chiteshwar Pujara, they've always, you know, filled in that gap whenever there's a requirement for them to open the innings. So it's not particularly unprecedented in that manner.
No, I think up until the mid-90s, openers were your openers and your middle order were your middle order. And you might get a situation where places like New Zealand quite often just couldn't find openers who averaged more than 28 in first-class cricket and threw guys in. Maybe Sri Lanka's another country again. Pakistan. There are some countries that have struggled with openers. And that's different.
Yeah.
If you struggle with openers, you don't have a choice, right? Like at a certain point. We've got 5 guys who can bat at number 5 and no one who can, open the batting. We're going to have to do that. But the countries who generally have opening batters have used what we would call traditional openers. Doesn't mean they're all traditional. Matt Hayden wasn't a traditional opener in style. Gordon Greenidge wasn't traditional. But I do think probably from the 2000s onwards, and I think part of the reason that happened at that point, Behram, was probably because that was a great batting era. And I remember, I've got a feeling Ian Chappell either wrote a column about this or talked about it a lot at the time, that the best place to bat at one stage in that sort of 2007 to 2014 area was opening. Because the bowlers weren't moving the ball very much. There was flat wickets everywhere around the world. You could score a lot of runs with the field up, and so I do think at that point we saw Dilshan, Watson, Katic, obviously Vero had already done it. I think there was a few others that I'm forgetting out there as well, where McCullum was probably another one in that period where the players were thinking, I might as well open, right?
Yeah.
And so that has changed a lot. Whereas I think opening the batting has been a specialist position for the most of the history of cricket. I don't think it is thought of in that way anymore. And part of the reason is I think it was always thought of as a specialist position because England were the dominant team and England were the ones that talked about cricket. And in England, it probably is still a specialist position, right? Remember they tried Alex Hales and Jason Roy. Neither of them could get the ball off the square. Wait, did Jason Roy open? Yeah, he did.
He did. He did.
And they couldn't get the ball off the square in those games. And so Warner's, who isn't, again, he's kind of picked as an opener, but was not traditionally an opener from a young age. He kind of fell into opening in white ball cricket. I think his first big score on List A cricket was in the middle order. So not a traditional opener, again, in that sense. You see a lot of guys who aren't traditional openers still have trouble when they go to New Zealand and England and South Africa. But everywhere else, it kind of is. Like you can, like in India, you could kind of open with anyone who's good enough to bat number 3 to number 5, probably, and sometimes even your number 6. Pakistan certainly is another place. And Australia, I would say, is another one. There isn't as much lateral movement in those countries. So a lot of it is how you control your innings, how you like the fast ball coming on. Do you have the ability to have soft hands occasionally? All those sorts of things. And a lot of batters have those skills. And so I do think we're seeing a changing of the guard. That doesn't mean it won't violently swing back again and go in the other direction. But I can certainly see why this is the case.
Yeah, and I mean, he could probably sit down with Uzi and talk to him about this sort of stuff, right? That what was it like for you to move up to the opening slot from the middle order? And I think
or Katic or Watson or Langer, like he can make a lot of calls in Australia.
Yeah, maybe not Langer. But anyway, another knock-on effect of Smith opening the batting, of course, you mentioned this before as well, is that Cam Green, who had lost his place in the side to Mitch Marsh ever since, Marsh had that Renaissance Ashes innings and he hasn't looked back since. Cam Green now gets to bat at 4, and in the 24 innings that he's batted in that position for Western Australia, he's done exceedingly well. Now, one would think that, all of Australia's best batters now get to play Test cricket. One size fits all. It's all rosy, and it's a paradise sort of situation, but it's definitely more complex than that, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the whole Cameron Green thing is really funny because Mitch Marsh wasn't supposed to be this good, right? And so they brought Mitch Marsh in for a couple of tests. They thought he'd be good against England. Maybe he'd get, a cheeky 70-odd, change some of the momentum, give him a couple of wickets. And, of course, Mitch Marsh has been fantastic since he's come back, and he ain't going anywhere at the moment, right? And the other thing is that Cameron Green, there are some players who kind of look like they can bat in multiple spots. Cameron Green, to me, looks like someone who can probably bat top 3 in white ball cricket and bat at number 4 in red ball cricket. And he spent a lot of his career, because he's a seam bowling all-rounder, of course, bowling further down than that. And it doesn't really seem to fit his skill sets of what he is as a batter. And so again, you have this situation where he clearly has looked, and he hasn't played a lot of cricket, right? He clearly looks his best at number 4. If you can get him back in at number 4, maybe they can get him batting the way he wanted. But when he, especially towards the end, he just looked like he didn't really understand batting at number 5 or number 6 and those sorts of positions. And he was sort of coming out with this defeated attitude. Now, I don't know, maybe he comes out in this series and struggles again and the number doesn't change. But sometimes just putting a player back to a position that they like. You know, I think we think about it psychologically a lot of the time. There is also a mental aspect. Sorry, I just said that. There is also a technical aspect.
Yeah.
It is possible that he prefers the ball coming on a little bit quicker when he first gets to the wicket and that harder ball, right? And you know, I remember, I can't remember who it was now, but I was having a conversation with a former player once about this, and he was saying, "What's the difference between number 4 and number 5?" And I said, 10 overs. And he sort of looked at me weirdly. And I was like, 10 overs is the difference because we have a wicket about every 60 balls in Test match cricket. And he said, actually, that's quite a big difference. Because if number 3 comes in at the 10 over mark and number 4 comes in at the 20 over mark, between 20 and 30 is the biggest change, right? That's when the ball really starts to soften. You know, outside of England in the Dukes balls in West Indies and England. But in general, that's when it becomes a completely different game. If you're used to batting up the order when the ball is coming onto the bat a little bit harder, that may not suit you as well. And it's little things. And we're like, oh, it's psychological, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it is literally a technical thing as well. They think Cameron Green is their future. Batting him at number 4, he's probably going to bat at number 4 or number 5 long-term in Test match cricket. It makes sense for them to give him another go, especially considering this is not a very taxing series coming up.
Yeah. Also, I mean, it makes more sense maybe to have him at number 4 as opposed to opener, which was a left field thought. We even discussed it in.
Don't get me wrong. I still think that could work, and I wouldn't be surprised if one day he ends up opening in red ball cricket for Australia as well. But if he didn't want to do it, or Steve Smith was desperate to do it, then I can also understand going in the other direction. But I would have offered it to Cameron Green.
Yeah. I mean, there is the workload aspect of that. And also he has this kidney disease since he was a young boy. So I'm not quite sure what the details of that are. So if someone knows, let us know in the comments. But you mentioned the words long-term. George Bailey echoed that sentiment that this is not a stopgap solution and they are thinking long-term, right? Now, here's my issue with that. Now, this Australian team, this is an aging squad. And in particular, if you look at the openers, Smith and Khawaja are both on the wrong side of 30. So how can it possibly be a long-term solution?
Yeah. I heard rumours that Khawaja might be retiring at the same time that Warner was. Clearly that hasn't happened. And you never know if it's just... Because I also heard rumours that Smith might go as well. And you never know if it's just a thing of once one guy retires, they all sort of go, oh, okay, well, you know, new generation, let's go. I would be surprised if Khawaja would retire just from a cricketing point of view of... Yeah, he's batting great, as you said before. And also, he wasn't always batting great. Like, let cash in when you're doing well and ride that, you know. He deserves one bad year of form at the end of his career, right? Like, he's earned that at this point.
Even if he gets that bad year, his average will slip to 44, 43. He'll take it.
Yeah. It's not an issue from that perspective. I would say, based on everything we've seen in the last couple of weeks, Smith is not looking at retiring anytime soon. But they are both mid-30s. Things can change very quickly when you're in your mid-30s. Age remains undefeated. So I'm kind of with you from that point of view. But what is long-term in George Bailey's mind? Is it 2 years? 2 years is actually a long time to have one opening partnership in Test cricket. Maybe that's enough. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, right? Because Australia are set to tour Sri Lanka and New Zealand in this current World Test Championship cycle, and then they get to host India. So, of course, India is a tough opposition, and they've even defeated Australia in their own backyard. But then again, you're playing at home. It's not like Smith has to go and play in India, which he's done really well over the years, so maybe that wasn't even a problem either. But they're not touring South Africa either, where it generally is the toughest, arguably, to bat in Test cricket. So touring Sri Lanka, New Zealand, and playing India at home, that doesn't seem like too steep a task.
No, it's it's not cruisy, but I can see why this is a good time to do it. And,
Yeah.
by the time it gets to the tougher tours, if he has done it for, a year and a half, 2 years, and he's got some runs under his belt, he's in a really good position then to go forward and give it a go. So I do think from that perspective, again, he's sort of in the right situation at the right time. If they were about to play a test series in South Africa or India, it would be very different. Right?
Or even England, for that matter.
Yeah, I thought about that, but I suppose of recent times in England with the baseball pitches, they're not quite as spicy.
Yeah.
But, England of a couple of years ago, for sure, that would have been another big challenge. And he will get green wickets in New Zealand, but we know that they don't quite do as much as they look like they're going to do. So, you have that one in the middle.
He averages, 131 or something? It's a crazy average, right?
Yeah, he's barely played there. It just shows you Australia just doesn't tour New Zealand. But yes, he averages 1 million runs there.
Yeah. Anyway, of course, starting off this new era or a journey against the West Indies at home, that is pretty much the perfect time for this experiment because Steve Smith has an outstanding record versus the men in maroon in Australia. And last time he scored an unbeaten double ton when West Indies toured Australia. It was just last summer, Australian summer this time. And that's coupled with the fact that he's only gotten out thrice in 7 innings versus them. So, yeah, couldn't have opted for this at a better time.
Cheyenne wrote this piece, but this is the first note I think I gave him, which is, hey, he's probably going to make runs. So Australian media kind of overhypes everything and overexcites things based on how they do at home, partly because that's how the Australian cricket summer works even more than most countries, and kind of ignores things away from home. But Steve Smith is almost unbowlable to at home anyway, right? I know he averages 65 or something in Australia, and he's going up against West Indies, who just came out and now are coming out with a more inexperienced bowling lineup. I would say that there isn't a position in the batting lineup where he shouldn't average 70 in this series against the West Indies. So it's a perfect time to play them, and it's like a warm-up, really, for when he has to. And Kimber Roach is there, so it's not, it's not a free pass, and they've got some other good bowlers as well, but they're not experienced. They're not massive. Like Kimber Roach is not a Australian conditions bowler. He's the wrong height. And when he was young and fast, it was a little bit different, but he's not as fast as he used to be. So realistically, Steve Smith should make runs against West Indies, no matter where he bats, even if he was, using a mango to bat with, to use your Twitter handle for no reason.
Using that mango?
That particular mango.
It's interesting how I've just realized that, by the time this podcast comes out, maybe that test match has started. Imagine he gets out on a duck and people listen to this conversation. That's good.
Oh, yeah, I forgot. Yeah, you're right. When this comes out, but even so, I think the point being is he's not facing Bumrah. He's not facing Rabada. He's not facing Jimmy Anderson, right? Kimber Roach is the bowler that he has to face there. And Kimber is better against left-handers anyway. If he's a left-hander, I'd be a little bit more like, that's an interesting challenge. And Kimber might still get him out. Some of the other bowlers, there's some talent there, but it's not very experienced in everything else. It just doesn't feel to me like a team who bowls on friendly wickets at home with Duke's balls, who we saw struggle in Australia at times last time, is suddenly going to come through and cause massive amounts of problems. And Steve Smith's really good at home. If he fails in this test, everything I've said here will look silly. So, and it's possible that you've already seen it. But they're going to play a couple of tests. My guess is that he will make runs here. This is not the challenge of whether. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is he could make 100 in each test here. That will not have actually finished the conversation of whether he can open in test match cricket. It's a lot longer conversation than that.
Oh, absolutely. And Jason Holder's not in the squad anymore either, is he? He's opted for T20 cricket, so that only makes that pace attack weaker. And Smith has gotten some practice in. He was playing some tennis with Novak Djokovic, so maybe that's good enough for this series, I suppose. Lastly, just to end this podcast, we've come to the conclusion that Steve Smith, at 34 and a half years of age, has chosen violence by ending his career batting as an opener. And, it was quite comfortable at number 4. He'd been getting runs there, year in, year out. And even though he's experienced that drop-off in average, after COVID, he's still an elite test batter. The numbers might not be otherworldly, but they're still really, really good. If you had to bet money, Jarrod, that whether or not Steve Smith as an opener would be a success overall, let's say 45, whether or not he'll average 45 with the bat as opener in this period, which side are you betting?
Well, 45 makes him probably top 3 openers in the world.
Yeah, that's why I put that number.
So that's a huge number.
Yeah.
I think I'm fairly confident if he does it for, let's say, 3 years, he averages 40. I just can't see, unless his batting completely drops off, and then it wouldn't matter where he batted. I can't see how he wouldn't average over 40. I think 45 is a decent number based on the way he's batted at recent times. I think the thing I would be skeptical of is the idea that he will go back to averaging in the 60s again. And I don't know if that's on his mind, whether he wants to go back to those crazy numbers that he used to have. But that's the bit where I would go, I don't know if I see that as something he can do again. But 45, with his skills against the fast ball, I think makes sense. And, the only thing, you talked just briefly before about the Big Daddy runs.
Yeah.
If he doesn't make Big Daddy scores again, 150 plus scores regularly, it's hard to maintain an average of 45 without being incredibly consistent. That's my only caveat to that. So is open in the batting going to mean that he starts making 120 and 180 and 240s? I don't know. I don't see how that necessarily changes. What I think it will change is his ability to get to 30 or 40 runs quite quickly and quite easily with a hard ball, especially in Australian conditions, hard ball banging onto the bat. And so I can see that 45 mark seems very, very doable for him. Anything above that is a huge bonus. If you can get an opening batter in modern cricket who can average 45 and Cameron Green can average 40 or 45 batting at number 4, then this has been completely worth it.
Yeah, game, set, match. And right now we're at the dawn of the Smith opener era. When we're at the dusk of the Smith opener era, I'll make a reel out of this, Jarrod, because we'll have those numbers then, and that'll make for great viewing. I'd say that if he does go on to average 45, this will be an absolute success. Even at 40, I would be content, right?
But that's good enough. Do you think it has to be a success for the number 4 position as well?
Yeah, it has to be.
Because we both know if he stayed at number 4, he would continue to average mid to high 40s.
Yeah.
Right?
So if he goes
to open and he averages 50, say, and Cameron Green averages 30, and then the next number 4 comes in and that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Is that it's a legitimate question of how these things work. And I don't know. I don't know what the answer to any of that is, but that's why it's fascinating. And as I said, great batters don't go up the order. They don't just suddenly decide they want to be openers when they're almost 35. He's a fascinating, weird cat, the way he thinks about cricket. And I back him because every step of the way, it hasn't made sense what he's done. And it works for him. And I think he understands himself better than anyone else ever has.
Definitely. You doubt him at your own peril. And it's really interesting because the opportunity cost of the number 4 average really comes into this. I can totally see Australia bumping Travis Head up a number if it doesn't work with Cam Green. I can see that happening. But let's see how it happens. And we're all super excited to see how Steve Smith will do as test match opener. And I think that brings this podcast to an end. So anyone who was watching this, thank you for staying with us this long. And if you like this episode, like it on YouTube, share it with your friends, subscribe to this channel and Jarrod's other YouTube channel for regular cricket content. We'll be back with another episode of Footmarks next week. That is all for now. Goodbye.
Thanks to the kind folks at FlexiSpot for looking after my office and my butt by sending me their E7 Pro desk that save your favorite desk heights at a touch of a button. You don't have to crank anything. This thing just finds the height that you like and you can work. And their BS12 Pro chair that supports my posterior while I'm recording, this ad and all my shows. If you need great desks, especially ones that change heights or the best quality chairs, head on over to FlexiSpot today.